Welcome to a special edition of Legal AF. I'm joined by Representative Ritchie Torres, Democrat of New York, representing the Bronx in the 15th. We just had, in the last couple of days, a terrible tragedy in New York, where at a midtown office building, a person, an American, coming across the country, crossing state lines with an AR-15, walking down Park Avenue in broad daylight, effectively at 6 o'clock, at least in the evening, walked into an office building housing the NFL and office services and opened fire. But it means more, especially when you look at the people who were killed. You look at the gun control problems of somebody walking down the street with an AR-15 and being allowed to do that. And then you look at who was there to protect and serve Officer Ditteral Islam of the Bangladeshi-American community. He happens to hail from Bronx, which is Ritchie Torres' home district. And there's nobody finer to brief our audience about issues of immigration and gun control and the Republicans' emphasis on arming criminals than Representative Ritchie Torres. And here's our interview. Now let's turn to something that is on so many different levels. We need to talk more about it, not just pass it over. 2 years ago or so, we've got the shooter of the United Healthcare executive 2 blocks over on 6th Avenue, while at 6 o'clock in the morning as the guy was walking into a meeting. And that's happening. Federal and state prosecutors are on that case. And now we've got, less than 2 years later, a guy from Vegas who gets a gun from his supervisor, buys it for $1,200, an AR-15, drives across country to go to the headquarters of the NFL, apparently, but also house some other major financial services companies like Blackstone, right? Blackstone. Walks into the lobby at 6:45 or so in the evening, having walked down, this is not a random street, Park Avenue in New York in the 50s, is, having worked there, is teeming with people, let alone tourists and workers in that block. Lots of financial services in that block, in that radius. Walks down, caught on every camera, with an AR-15, not even hidden. Walks into the lobby of the building and starts shooting, including an off-duty New York City police officer. And then within minutes, MAGA, to try to stop gun control, makes some horrible, horrible statements, as 4 people are dead, including a senior executive in financial services who worked at BlackRock, a woman that was a senior executive running their real estate, their REIT business. And then to public servants, to civil servants who were killed in the lobby, and others. One person was saved by a Uber Eats delivery guy, or a delivery person who was delivering dinner to her and said, "Don't come down, there's an active shooter." Could you imagine what would happen? That would have been our 5th victim or 6th victim. Talk about it. Turns out that this slain officer, this fallen officer, Officer Islam, is from the Bronx. You're going to the funeral. Talk to us about what just happened and what should happen next.
Well, first, Officer Islam, served in the 47th precinct, which I represent in the Northeast Bronx. And, his tragic death just serves as a reminder that behind every badge and every uniform is a person, a husband or wife, a father or mother, a son or a daughter. And, when you put on that uniform and when you put on that badge, there's no guarantee that you're returning home to the people you love. And so when we see the men and women of the NYPD out in the field risking their lives, we should just thank them for their service and their sacrifice. Public safety and those who are entrusted with protecting it should never be taken for granted. And for me, it's a story about the lack of gun safety in America. For me, public safety has no greater enemy than the far right, which insist that weapons of war should flow freely on the streets of America and travel freely across state lines. The mass shooter legally purchased a military-style weapon in Nevada and then transported it across state lines and then opened fire in New York City, in the heart of New York City. and murdered 5 New Yorkers. And why must New York live with the consequences of another state's dangerously lax gun laws? Like, there's a sense in which I feel like we have been stripped of our public safety. We have been stripped of control over our destiny because we are powerless to prevent weapons of war from pouring into the streets of New York City. And it serves as a reminder that America is the only industrialized country on earth that faces a never-ending nightmare of mass shootings and gun violence. And gun violence is not an inevitability. It is a public policy choice. And we as a society, largely because of Republicans, have chosen gun violence over public safety. You know, Republicans accuse Democrats of wanting to defund the police. Republicans should be held accountable for arming the criminals. Republicans want criminals to be armed with weapons of war, with AK-47s, and open fire in the heart of Midtown Manhattan.
By the way, that is just the way you just put it, Representative Torres, is exactly the way the Democrats should be using that to campaign against the Republicans. I've never heard it so perfectly put about holding the Republicans accountable for arming the criminals and dispensing with public safety. Because you're right, it is a policy choice. And to hear,
what can an officer do? Like if you know, there's no amount of security. If someone has an AK-47, the police are powerless.
Right.
No one's carrying. Your average officer is not carrying an AK-47.
And Donald Trump is worried about National Guardsmen being spit on instead of worrying about AR-15s in the hands of criminals and things that we can do. You know, if he walked in with a handgun, I'm not sure Officer Islam would have been better matched, but it would have been at least a fighting chance. You know, to have taken him out before he killed other people. And the other aspect of this, and I think you're going to the funeral later today. Yeah. And a lot of New York and a lot of public officials are going to go to that funeral. And Officer Islam was part of a very proud ethnic community in New York, the Bangladeshi community that I know well. All you got to do is keep your eyes open on the streets of New York, and you'll see proud Bangladeshi-Americans working as parking enforcement and traffic control and law enforcement and other things. It's just part of a proud tradition for them to serve. And you and I talked before we got on about the irony of his being an immigrant or coming from an immigrant community. And why don't you talk about it from that perspective?
Look, Donald Trump is demonizing immigrants at a time when an immigrant like Officer Islam gave up his life for the safety of our city and our country. And Officer Islam is the embodiment of New York City, of America at its best, of America as a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy that's home to immigrants from every corner of the world. That is the American strength. That's the American asset. And you know, immigrants like Officer Islam have done more to protect the American people than Donald Trump will ever do in his life. And so I think that's a piece of the story that cannot be overlooked, is we should celebrate the contributions of immigrants, especially the immigrants who risk their lives, who come to America in search for a better life and put their lives at risk to protect a country that has become their home. Like, that to me is a beautiful part of the American story.
Yeah. Well, it's a presidency, it's an administration that's busy through Stephen Miller deporting people from the military who have mixed immigration status but are serving America in the armed forces and proudly and bravely. You know, split screen is that as Officer Islam dies in the line of duty, protecting, you know, capitalism. I mean, he's in you know, one of the temples of financial services in Midtown, but he's there doing his job that he was sworn to do, if you will. Split screen. You got Donald Trump putting kids in cages again, chasing other human beings through churches and factories and farms and schools and zip tying them together in vans and putting bounties on people so that ICE gets all excited and starts abusing people in order to get that $10,000 bounty, just incentivizing terrible and bad behavior in the world of immigration. I mean, look, I've been told that there is a 10 a.m. meeting every morning that Stephen Miller heads, in which all of the various departments of border control and ICE and everything have to report in about how many human beings they put in a cage and arrested every morning, 10 a.m., without fail. That is the focus of this administration, while the Officer Islams of the world are dying in the line of duty.
Well, as a result of the Republican reconciliation bill, ICE is going to have a larger budget than the FBI, the DEA, and the ATF combined.
Wow.
Like if ICE were a military, it would have the 16th largest military budget in the world. So we're going to invest more in the mass deportation industrial complex than we do in counterterrorism. And, a few weeks ago, you and I spoke about Donald Trump's attempt to defund Homeland Security in cities like New York. I think of the mass shooting as an act of domestic terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
And New York City remains a top target for terrorism, both foreign and domestic. Since 9/11, we've seen 67 terror plots and counting. 2/3 of those terror plots have happened in the past 10 years. New York City faces an average of one terror plot per month. We just had a mass shooting in the very heart of Manhattan, in one of the financial centers of Manhattan. And against that backdrop, the Trump administration is intent on depriving New York City of the Homeland Security funding that it needs to keep Americans safe.
I wonder who they're going to trot out to attend, if anybody, from the Trump administration to the funeral.
I'd be shocked if the Trump administration even attends.
Right. I think next time you're on with us, we'll talk about that and what it means. But I'm so glad you are attending and representing not just the people of the New York 15th, but all people of good conscience. And we always appreciate you being on with us, Representative Torres, and briefing our audience.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Representative Ritchie Torres joining Legal AF. I'm Michael Popok. Until my next report. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.